and your uncle went to that school. He said, wow, you a principal? I said, yeah. He said, wow, that's funny. So I'm waiting to hear what he said to my daughter when he got home about that. But I want to thank Mosque's president, Deen Mohammed II, and his committed team of convention planners, including, his lovely wife, his committed and dedicated wife. I know all of your names, but I understand we're on a tight schedule, so I'm not going to try to call everybody's name. But I tell you, you guys are an awesome team. You're just really an awesome team, and I think we ought to really give them a round of applause. We can stop eating long enough to do that. I think the theme of this year's conference is extraordinarily timely. Perhaps it's divinely timely. I tell you, when some things happen, you just see Allah's handprint on it. You can't necessarily prove it, but with believers, you don't really have to prove it. You just know that his handprint is on it. But this theme, keeping the promise, promoting excellence in the best traditions of African American people, is one that I don't think could have come at a better time in our history. There's so much in the environment now about promises. I know many of you know over the last week and over the last year, with commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, we had a lot of talk about promises. Promises kept, promises broken, and many of us are old enough to remember that actual event, and there was a lot of talk about promises also. But I believe that when things like this happen, it's all in Allah's plan, and that plan has been evolving and unfolding over the ages, and we are just blessed to be instruments of carrying that plan forward. But I believe that though there have been promises kept, there have been promises broken, that we should be celebrating our success. I think we should be celebrating our success as a community of Muslims, African American Muslims, but I also think that we should be celebrating our success as African American people. And that we have a responsibility to keep in front of African American people our successes and not to give them excuses to lament and think that we've been failures. Imam Mohammed spoke on success, the topic of the key to success, and he gave this quote from Quran. It said, "And who is better in religion than one who submits his whole self to God and is a doer of good and follows the order of Abraham, the upright in faith." And this is from the Quran, chapter 4, ayat 125. And his comments on this was, so when we read this verse from the Quran, we learn an important lesson for people of faith. And that lesson is, we must realize that if we give ourselves wholly to God, He will befriend us. Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, has also taught that if anyone will give himself totally to God and love Him with all his heart, God would then become his defender. His actions and his soul would then be protected by God, as though God was the one committing those acts. Whatever he does with his hands or with any other part of his body or his soul, God will be with him. His deeds will become prosperous and successful. I think that the Imam is reflecting something that's been present in the spirit of African American people in a very consistent and very deep way throughout our history. Particularly, I'm speaking about history here in America. It's been a part of our history as Muslims, and it's been a part of our history as African American. Think about our own history under the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and under our honorable leader, Imam Deen Muhammad. Now, some people do have a problem with us coming to the conclusion that we have been successful in America. Their assessment brings them to the conclusion that we're not successful. In fact, they will argue with you. Look at how many of us are in poverty. Look at the fact that so many of us are in prison. Look at the fact that we're not being educated, given a quality education. Look at how we're falling behind on all the things that we should be moving forward on, and how we're moving forward on all the things we should be falling behind on. I hear this, and you're sometimes tempted to back down and not challenge this conclusion. But if we look at success, the way the Imam discussed it and defined it in this lecture that he was given, you have to conclude that it's very possible to be successful. Although everybody might not be successful at that time, it's possible to be successful, even collectively. And I want to make sure I get this right, because it is a delicate topic. He said, if you're able to live a life of total submission to Allah in the tradition of following the order of Abraham, the upright, you have already been successful. However, this order of Abraham is not achieved just by individual success. Okay, now I'm finished quoting Imam. I'm speaking inspired by that. I'm not giving you his words now. However, this order of Abraham is not achieved by individual success alone. Remember that we refer to Abraham as the father of nations. We don't just refer to Abraham as the father of his family, of his individual children. We call him the father of nations. When we come together to advance community life, we have been successful. All the elements of our success may not have manifested yet, but we have been successful in just coming together to advance community life. When we have descended into individualism and materialism, even if we have justified it in the name of religion, or even if we have justified it with religious language, we are not being successful. And again, I go back to the Imam. He says, there are some people who say, oh, I want to be so much in accord with God that my will becomes God's will, that my spirit becomes one with God's spirit. But, he says, these people then leave the society to accomplish that. We cannot be really holy and contributing nothing to the good life of human beings. In other words, you may go off and you may be extremely righteous. You may pray. You may be holy. You may never do have individual wrongs. But are you really advancing community life? Are you changing the conditions of humanity in doing that? The Imam says, in the spirit of Abraham, that you're not. Now, if individual holiness falls short of the success that God is calling us to, certainly individual material success falls short of the success that God is calling us to. You have many examples of individual success. African Americans who are successful in ways that we never imagined before. At the same time that you have that, you see have African Americans in prison at a rate higher than we've ever had before. So there's something wrong with this picture of success when you have extreme individual success on the one side, and you have our community appearing to be going in the most negative of directions on the other side. What is it in our own history, in our own value systems, that's allowing that to happen? I question African American history as much as I'm thankful that I had it very early in my education. I went to so-called segregated schools, and they gave us African American history. When I moved to Detroit, I realized how blessed I was, because most of my classmates in Detroit had never had any African American history. But at the same time that I'm happy with that exposure to African American history, we have to have the courage to critique those things that are dear to us and find out whether they are feeding us what we need to advance as a people. The shortcoming in the African American history that I received, and I know I probably have historians in the room, and they could probably give you a much better understanding of this than me. The shortcoming is most of the African American history that I received was about individual success. What was celebrated was the first African American to do this, the only African American to do that, the few African Americans that have ever achieved this. So what does that translate into? That translates into us thinking it is really an achievement if we're the first African American to live in a white neighborhood. I'm the only one on my block.